JD Vance. All right. JD Vance recently pulled up on Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan, and he had a little bit of an exchange back and forth. It turned into a debate. I thought it was supposed to be an interview, but apparently it turned into a debate. Make sure y'all hit a like for the algorithm, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications. Let's rock. I'm going to read that super chat shortly.
Pete Hegseth, it was a tie. Bipartisan opposition, smallest margin since the job was created. You had to break that tie. If the nominee can't unite your party, how's he going to lead 3 million people?
Well, look, I think Pete is a disruptor.
Ooh, leading with hostility, are we, Margaret? Let's slow down. Okay?
And a lot of people don't like that disruption, but Margaret, that disruption is incredibly necessary. If you think about all of those bipartisan massive votes, we have to ask ourselves, what did they get us? They got us a country where we fought many wars over the last 40 years, but haven't won a war about as long as I've been alive. They've got us a military with a major recruitment crisis, a procurement price crisis that's totally dysfunctional, where we buy airplanes for billions and billions of dollars, terrible cost overruns, the delivery dates are always delayed. So we need a big change. Now, admittedly, there are people who don't like that big change, but it is necessary, and it's explicitly what Donald J. Trump ran on. And I think part of the reason why the American people elected him their 47th president.
First of all, J.D. Vance is still pulling up on the ops, and meeting them with don't matter how many questions they are, don't matter what the questions are, still meeting them the same way that they was doing during the campaign season. But also on top of that, I want to remind people of something. And this is why we hold Kamala Harris accountable the way that we held her accountable, is that J.D. Vance already has made some tie-breaking votes. Kamala Harris, if I'm not mistaken, made more tie-breaking votes than any vice president in history. Why? Because the vice president is the president of the Senate. When you're gridlocked in the Senate and you need somebody to push something through, who do you call? The vice president. The vice president, because a lot of people say, oh, they just be around, they just be looking pretty and all of this stuff. No, the vice president is the president of the Senate. And so they are the ones that cast the tie-breaking votes to then push through legislation and make sure that things get done. Okay? So that's a little civics lessons for you. The vice president is not just there in order to pretend to be the border czar like Kamala Harris did. They push through legislation, they advocate, they beat that whip, they get out there in them streets. And in Kamala Harris' case, she was out there advocating for the alphabet community over in African countries and in Ghana, instead of taking care of business here in the United States of America. But I'm going to learn you today.
So the main objective is changing all of that it's going to be Pete Hegseth alone?
I'd say the main problem the main thing that we want Pete Hegseth to do is to fix the problems at the Department of Defense. And unfortunately, there are many. We've gotten into way too many wars that we don't have a plan for winning. We've gotten into way too many misadventures that we shouldn't have got into in the very first place. And our procurement process, Margaret, is incredibly broken. We're in an era.
Decisions.
Well, of course, they're policy decisions, but they're also logistical and implementation decisions. If you look at where we are with the rise of artificial intelligence, with the rise of drone
we're gonna talk about
technology
that today,
and drone
too.
warfare, we have to really, top to bottom, change the way that we fund the procurement of weapons, the way that we arm our troops. This is a major period of disruption, and we think Pete Hegseth is the guy to lead the job. Now, there's another element to this, Margaret, too, which is we believe that military morale, at least until the election of President Trump, was historically low. You had the Army missing recruitment goals by tens of thousands of soldiers, and already recruitment is starting to pick up because Pete Hegseth is fundamentally a warfighter's leader at the Department of Defense. He is a guy who sees not through the perspective of the generals or the bureaucrats. He looks at things through the perspective of the men and women that we send off to fight in our wars.
Both the Wall Street Journal and the National
J.D. Vance is so
conservative
sharp.
publications, as you know, have been critical of Tulsi Gabbard. The review called her an atrocious nominee who deserves to be defeated. They compared her defense of Edward Snowden, the fugitive who stole U.S. secrets, to an attorney general who thinks the mob gets a bad rap. Her refusal to accept U.S. intelligence findings that Assad gassed his own people, they said, was like a nominee for OMB director not being able to count. Does any of this give you pause putting her in charge of the U.S. intelligence community? Yes or no?
No, Margaret, look, these are publications that attacked Donald J. Trump obsessively, but those publications don't determine who the president is, the American people do.
Him.
And Donald J. Trump is the person who determines who his cabinet is, not these publications that I think, frankly, have lost relevance.
The Senate will
Tulsi
ultimately
Gabbard's
decide.
Well, the Senate will provide advice and consent, as is its constitutional obligation, but I feel confident that Tulsi Gabbard will ultimately get through. Two things that are important to know about Tulsi. First of all, she is a career military servant who's had a classification at the highest levels for nearly 2 decades. She has impeccable character, impeccable record of service. And she also is a person who I think is going to bring some trust back to the intelligence services. The bureaucrats at our intelligence services have gotten completely out of control. They've been part of the weaponization of our political system, the weaponization of our justice system. We need to have good intelligence services who keep us safe. But part of that is restoring trust in those services, and we think Tulsi is the right person to do it. That's
she
why the
doesn't
president
trust those intelligence services.
She recognizes that the bureaucrats have gotten out of control, and we need somebody there who's going to rein them in and return those services to their core mission of identifying information that's going to keep us safe.
Absolutely. I 100% love Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard is the person that ended Kamala Harris's campaign in 2019, only to have Biden pick her up and save her. I'm going to save you, Kamala. And then y'all got diversity, equity, and inclusion inside of the White House. And y'all live to regret it. Y'all got diversity, equity, and inclusion inside of the White House, and you lived to regret it. I'll take Tulsi Gabbard as a leader of the intelligence community, a person that serves this country and obviously can communicate her thoughts very clearly, over Kamala Harris inside of the White House as the Vice President of the United States of America and the President of the Senate any day of the week.
Campaigned on lowering prices for consumers. We've seen all of these executive orders.
Yeah, exactly, Kenny P. I said the same thing. But I thought the Democrats was all for Tulsi prior to her joining Trump. Yeah, they was rocking with her. They was rocking with her because she was a Democrat, but it wasn't until she switched over into becoming a Republican because she was smart and she understood that American values more closely line with what Trump was saying versus what the extreme left had become. Because I say this all the time. The party of your parents are no longer here. The Democrats of the 80s and the 90s and what they stood for, even though it was still the Democratic plantation, it was nowhere near extreme as it is now. And so when she said, you know what, my values more or less align with where the Republicans are going, then all of a sudden she became a threat to national security. Okay.
Which one lowers prices?
We have done a lot, and there have been a number of executive orders that have caused already jobs to start coming back into our country, which is a core part of lowering prices. More capital investment, more job creation in our economy is one of the things that's going to drive down prices for all consumers, but also raise wages so that people can afford to buy the things that they need.
Right.
If you look at our slate of
executive
orders, no, Margaret, prices are going to come down, but it's going to take a little bit of time, right? The president has been president for all of 5 days.
Right.
I think that in those 5 days, he's accomplished more than Joe Biden did in 4 years. It's been an incredible breakneck pace of activity. We're going to work with Congress. We're, of course, going to have more executive orders, and we're going to try, the way that you lower prices is that you encourage more capital investment into our country. And you ask specifically, what executive order is going to help lower prices? All of the stuff that we've done on energy to explore more energy reserves, to develop more energy resources in the United States of America. One of the main drivers of increased prices under the Biden administration is that we had a massive increase in the energy prices.
Yep.
Donald Trump has already taken multiple executive actions that are going to lower energy prices. And I do believe that means consumers are going to see lower prices at the pump and at the grocery store, but it's going to take a little bit of time. Rome wasn't built in a day.
Yeah.
And while we've done a whole lot, we can't undo all of the damage of Joe Biden's presidency in 4 days.
Well, there are a lot of things that contributed to higher energy prices, and there was record oil and gas production.
Yes, Joe Biden did many terrible things to lead to an increase in prices. I agree, Margaret.
No, but all the things you experience at the grocery store are what people touch and feel. That's what you were talking about, bacon on the campaign trail.
Of course, of course.
Those things, when do consumers actually get to touch and feel a difference in their lives?
Well, Margaret, how does bacon get to the grocery store? It comes on trucks that are fueled by diesel fuel. If the diesel's way too expensive, the bacon's going to become more expensive. How do we grow the bacon? Our farmers need energy to produce it. So if we lower energy prices, we are going to see lower prices for consumers, and that is what we're trying to fight for.
Well,
Handle it
the flurry
in,
of executive
JD.
orders, most of them weren't about the economy. Many of them.
He's getting better. He's even better than he was on the campaign trail. He's still getting good. He's still getting better.
more though, Margaret. We had, I think
You had
we've
a
taken
promise
over
of tariffs by February 1st.
We've taken over 200 executive actions, some executive orders,
220 to be
other
exact.
executive actions. Again, this is in less than a week, and a lot of them were focused on the economy, bringing investment into our country and lowering energy prices. We've also focused on safety, restoring public safety, ending weaponization of the Department of Justice. We've done a lot, and I think the president is to be.
Christopher Chapman says, I don't know about that, AD. Do companies really pass savings down to the consumers? They absolutely do. You want one example of it? The grocery store. All right. What is the biggest grocer inside of the United States of America? Many people don't know this, but Walmart sells more than 25% of every grocery to Americans and consumers. One of the things consumers worried about and they complained about was that Walmart was actually passing savings, too many savings over to consumers. And what it did was it killed small business. It killed other grocery stores. It killed mom and pop spots. Same thing with Amazon, so on and so forth. But they had to increase prices because they could not absorb that many losses and then be able to subsidize it with whatever it is that they had going on in other parts of the company. That's why you then seen them be able to survive during a lot of these transitions, whereas other companies weren't. Walmart isn't really a grocer. They actually pass almost 100% of their savings over to the consumer in hopes that you buy other things from Walmart. That's what we call a loss leader. Amazon is the same way. Amazon was not making a profit in its bookstore or Amazon.com. As a matter of fact, when you look at the amount that they do in revenue versus what it is that they generate, you will then realize that they don't make any money on that side. That is more or less about data and logistics, whereas Amazon Web Services is the powering aspect of that business that then generates the majority of the revenue. If you look at Kroger's, and they were trying to merge just about a month or two ago, and that merger was turned down. And if y'all join Stock Club, you would be able to know this. Tap into Stock Club. We have Stock Club. We got the live stream going on tomorrow. I'm going to drop that today, and I'm going to drop the link in the chat for y'all to be able to jump into Stock Club right after the show that we do tomorrow. If you join Stock Club, you will realize I break down all of these numbers company by company, along with telling y'all the 8 things that we look for in order to invest in a company. Grocery stores are notorious, which made Kamala Harris's rhetoric on the campaign trail as far as limiting the amount of money that grocery stores charge. They are notorious for having very, 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 very low margins on their products. They have a lot of debt. They have to generate a lot of revenue. They got to do over $100 billion in sales to get $1.5 billion in profit. Over $100 billion in sales to get over $1 to $2 billion in profit. Do you know what generates the most revenue as far as margins? Margins meaning the amount that you make in profit per product. So if I sell it for $1, I really get to keep 10 cents of it. Do you know what the greatest profit generator inside of grocery is? Perishables. Yogurt, milk, cheese, things like that. Which means that they also have to make sure that they combat theft. They were affected over there on the West Coast. And they also have to prevent shrink, meaning the amount of products that they got to throw away or just walk out the store somehow. So when we talk about passing prices and savings on to the consumers, JD Vance is right. The majority of the cost is getting the product in the store. It's the logistics, it's shipping it in, it's the ports. We talked about the ports all last year and the strike that was happening all leading up to Trump's presidency. It's everything. Everything outside of grocery. It's the pay of the employees, which you'll then see Democrats say, oh, we need everybody to make $27 an hour and have a livable wage. It's the stores, it's the rent, it's the logistics, it's the shrink, it's all of these different mandates and permitting and red tape that they have to deal with in order to even be open. And right now they're trying to survive. Most businesses are trying to survive. Let's continue.
Commended for actually coming in and doing something with this incredible mandate the American people gave him. He's not sitting in the Oval Office doing nothing. He's doing the American people's business, and I think they're going to see a lot of good effects from it.
Shout out to Dev.
A lot of these announcements.
And make sure, hold on, wait. Before we continue, I know that y'all be forgetting to hit a like for the algorithm. That's cool. I know you're going to do it before you head out today. But I will encourage you guys, this is the greatest morning show on earth. So I want to tell y'all to do 3 things. The first thing I want y'all to do is make sure y'all subscribe to the channel if you've been here more than once. That way you get notifications that we go on live every single Monday through Friday. We never miss. The second thing that I want you to do is I want you to make sure that you send this to your family and friends, at least 3 people, because we don't want to be successful by ourselves, and we have the greatest show on earth. The third thing that I want you guys to do is to make sure that you tab into the Patreon, because that's where we really start breaking things down and we get to the money. We got Sock Club coming up tomorrow that will be dropping inside of the Patreon today. Let's continue.
Have yet to take effect.
Sure.
The president did say he wants to do something with an executive order in relation to federal emergency response. He said he may reform or eliminate FEMA. Instead of sending emergency responders, he may start to send a percentage of money to states to take care of themselves. But, you know, FEMA has specialized expertise that some of these states just don't have
Margaret,
in their arsenal. And
I wish
how
that they...
will states who are lower income states, the Mississippis, the Kentuckys, the Alabamas, be able to do this for themselves without federal help?
Well, the president, to be clear, is not saying we're going to leave anybody behind. He's saying that in the way that we administer these resources, some of which is coming from the federal level, some of which is coming from the state level, we've got to get the bureaucrats out of the way and get the aid to the people who need it most.
But these are the
Let's be
first
honest,
responders.
Margaret, you talk about the expertise from FEMA. FEMA in North Carolina, in California, in Florida with some of the hurricanes has often been a disaster. And it's not because we don't have good people at FEMA, it's because bureaucratic red tape and garbage prevents the rapid deployment of resources to the people who need it most.
Shout out to Dynamite.
Do this
Welcome.
themselves?
The president is trying to encourage us to reform the way that we deliver emergency response in a way that gets resources.
Guys,
So don't
good.
take
You
it
don't want to
literally,
throw nobody under the
is what you're saying.
We should take the president at his
don't wanna
word
throw
that
anybody under
FEMA
the
needs
bus.
desperate reform, because it does. Margaret, when I went to North Carolina as VP-elect, but before we were sworn in, people would talk about how FEMA would get resources, food, medicine, water to a warehouse, but then would have no plan to get it from the warehouse to the people in the mountains who were literally starving and thirsting to death. We can do so much better, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we will.
But they work with the state and local officials.
They often
So
don't work
now
well
it's
enough. And again, that's
going
not
to be on
because
the state
of
and local officials?
the FEMA management officials don't work well enough with the state and local officials to get resources to the people who need it. We should expect, and this is, I think, one of the fundamental premises of President
he
Trump's
don't need a
leadership,
teleprompter.
the American people should expect more of their government. When there's a terrible disaster, they should expect food, medicine, and water to get to the people who need it. When there's a terrible fire in California, the fire hydrants ought to actually turn on. I am sick of the American people having such low expectations for their government. They should demand more of us, because this is the greatest country in the world, and that's what Donald Trump's leadership promises to bring back.
So still count on the federal government, but watch that space. Let me ask you about another area.
I can't stand combative people. It aggravates me. It burns me to my soul. It shows the ignorance, and it shows that they never came into it with the right intentions in the first place. They're not there to ask the questions and get the answers. They're there to push an agenda, and this is one of the reasons why a lot of these places and a lot of these companies are starting to go under.
Yeah, that you campaigned on quite a lot, and there was a flurry of activity on, and that has to do with immigration.
Sure.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops this week condemned some of the executive orders
We don't
signed
care
by President Trump,
about a bunch
specifically
of them that have
those
been touching on kids, getting all of their lawsuits out. We don't care about what they think.
allowing immigration and customs enforcement to enter churches and to enter schools. Do you personally support the idea of conducting a raid or enforcement action in a church service, at a school?
Well, let me address this. Of course, if you have a person who is convicted of a violent crime, whether they're an illegal immigrant or a non-illegal immigrant, you have to go and get that person to protect the public safety. That's not unique to immigration. But let me just address this particular issue, Margaret, because as a practicing Catholic, I was actually heartbroken by that statement. And I think that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops needs to actually look in the mirror a little bit and recognize that when they receive over $100 million to help resettle illegal immigrants, are they worried about humanitarian concerns, or are they actually worried about their bottom line?
When they receive over $100 million to help resettle illegal immigrants, are they really concerned about whether or not these people are being deported, or are they concerned about their bottom line? And this is why we need people to just tell it like it is. No more hiding the truth. No more covering it up. No more pretending and playing politics. This is why we need to drain the swamp in every space. This is one of the reasons why Brandon Johnson kept referring to the archdiocese. And I'm going to consult with the archdiocese, and we're going to make sure that we get the proper services and we expedite the process, and that the community is served. One thing that we won't do is that we're never going to leave an illegal migrant behind. Not on my watch. Not on my watch. You know, this administration has been something of a kerfuffle to work with. But the one thing that we're not going to do is we're not going to let the archdiocese down, and we're going to make sure that every single child, no matter how many that they are, no matter what the cost is, no matter how bad our credit rating gets here in Chicago, me, Brandon Johnson, Mayor of Chicago. I'm sorry. Let me finish my statement. You asked your question. Do you want to hear my answer? Do you want to hear my answer? Because we could just walk out of here right now. We don't have to continue to have this conference, or you can let me finish my full statement. Because earlier in this year, you referred to young black people as terrorists because they were stomping on cars in the middle of the night and tearing people up and pulling them out of their cars and beating them in the head with bats. That they weren't there. Excuse me. They were not terrorists. That was a large gathering. Okay. So if you're going to be obtuse, if you're not going to let me finish, if you insist on trying to lead with violence instead of leading with a solution, that is the only thing we care about in Chicago. Okay? So I'm going to end that question right now. That's what we get. That's why they concerned. It all comes back down to the money. That's what it is. When you talk about the church, when you talk about the politicians, when you talk about all of these people, it all comes back down to the money. It is not about illegal migrants. It is not that they care anything about you. It is not that they advocating for you. They don't care anything about you. The church, the convening of the bishops, all of these people are there for the money. Okay? I don't care if you're Brandon Johnson. I don't care if you're Eric Adams. You know, the Biden administration, he told me, he said, Eric, be a good Democrat. You know, when I met with Trump, when I met with Tom Homan, I don't care if you're Eric Adams. I don't care if you're Karen Bass. Oh, yes, Mr. President. I don't care who you are. The fact of the matter is, this is the reason why we named this the Millionaire Morning Show. It's all going to come back down to the money.
We are going to enforce immigration law. We're going to protect the American people.
Yeah.
Donald Trump promised to do that. And I believe the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, if they're worried about the humanitarian costs of immigration enforcement, let them talk about the children who have been sex trafficked because of the wide open border of Joe Biden.
You personally
let them talk
support
about
them going into
people
schools
like Laken
and
Riley
churches.
who were brutally murdered. I support us doing law enforcement against violent criminals, whether they're illegal immigrants or anybody else, in a way that keeps us safe. Let me ask this question, Margaret. Let's separate the immigration issue. If you had a violent murderer in a school, of course I want law enforcement to go and get that person out.
Of course.
So what's the point of the question?
You changed the regulation this week. That's the point of the question.
Exactly.
Giving the authority to go into churches and go into schools.
We empowered law enforcement to enforce
but
the
that
law
also
everywhere
has
to protect
knock-on
Americans.
Effect, a chilling.
Shout out to JD Vance, holding it down, not getting himself involved with these women that want to be combative.